The pounding at the door rattled the whole house like a thunderclap. I froze, my arms tightly wrapped around my daughter, who was sobbing uncontrollably against my chest, her breathing shallow and panicked. Her tiny fingers clutched my shirt, trembling while her feeding tube tugged awkwardly from wires attached to her side. My wife peeked through the blinds and gasped, "It's the police and Mrs. Harrison. Oh God, Karen." I felt my stomach drop. What the hell was going on? I opened the door, just a crack, heart hammering in my chest. Two officers stood on the porch, eyes scanning the living room behind me, their hands resting cautiously near their belts. Before they could even speak, a voice from across the street pierced the air. She shared it on Facebook. Everyone's seen it. It was my neighbor Rob, standing in his driveway, phone in hand, a look of disgust twisted on his face. I didn't understand. What did he mean? My wife stepped outside, barefoot, her voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" Rob turned the phone toward us. My breath caught. There it was, our daughter's medical chart, her condition, her diagnosis, the surgeries, the feeding tube, the oxygen schedule, all of it blasted across the neighborhood Facebook group with Karen's caption, "This is what's bringing down our community's value." A chill ran through me. I staggered backward. My knees buckled, and I sat on the floor as my daughter buried her face deeper into my neck, whimpering, "Why are they looking at me, Daddy?" I wanted to scream, to break something, to demand justice right then and there. The officers looked uncomfortable, unsure. One of them mumbled, "We received a call about a possible safety hazard involving medical equipment outside your home." I stared at him. "Are you kidding me?" That was our ADA-compliant ramp, the one the hospital insisted we install. Karen had been gunning for it since the day it went up. She had asked if we could paint it to match the neighborhood, then demanded that it be removed altogether for aesthetic reasons. But now, this was something else. She had accessed private information, stuff we had only shared with doctors. The screenshot even showed our daughter's full name, medical ID, and the notes from her most recent hospitalization. My wife was shaking now, tears streaking down her face as she tried to explain to the officers, but they barely responded. They weren't here to help us. They were here because Karen had spun some story, and now we were the ones under scrutiny. I saw movement behind her. Karen, standing by her rose bushes in her spotless cream cardigan, phone in hand, filming us. My voice cracked. She posted my disabled daughter's medical file online without consent. That's a federal crime. The officer looked stunned. "You're sure it was her?" "She's standing right there." I yelled, pointing, but Karen turned away, casually, sipping from her thermos like it was just another Tuesday. My daughter let out a fragile sob. I held her tighter, not knowing what else to do. That's when I realized this wasn't just a mean neighbor or a petty HOA vendetta. This was deliberate harm. This was someone going out of their way to ruin us, to shame a child with medical needs so she could keep her pristine little world untouched. As I stood there, shaking with rage and disbelief, a few more neighbors stepped out of their homes. Some looked horrified, others indifferent. I saw phones in hands. I saw whispers. My privacy, my daughter's dignity had been shredded, not with fists, but with a click and a share button. The digital betrayal was complete. My wife whispered, "We have to fight this." I nodded slowly, jaw clenched. This wouldn't end here. And for the first time, I knew we were going to take her down. This wasn't just about HOA rules anymore. This was personal. 6 months earlier, the world had felt entirely different. Our car rolled gently down Sycamore Lane, sunlight streaming through the windshield as we passed tidy lawns, perfectly trimmed hedges, and rows of near-identical homes that practically gleamed with pride. My wife, exhausted yet glowing with cautious optimism, looked back at our daughter sleeping peacefully in her car seat, her tiny frame wrapped in a soft blanket covered in stars. "This could be it," she whispered. "A realoma. A fresh start." I wanted so badly to believe her. After a year of hospital visits, ER scares, and endless waiting rooms, we needed calm more than anything else. The house we just bought was modest, but beautiful, a single-story place with ramp potential, a shaded backyard, and enough space for our daughter's medical supplies and therapy visits. On the day we moved in, neighbors actually came over to greet us. A tall woman with red lipstick and military posture introduced herself as Karen. Welcome to Sycamore Oaks. I'm on the HOA board, so if you have any questions about neighborhood rules or amenities, feel free to ask. She smiled wide, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. And who's this little angel? She cooed, crouching slightly to peek at our daughter, who was quietly resting in her stroller with oxygen tubes connected to her nose. She's our miracle, my wife said, proudly. Karen paused just long enough for it to register before adding, of course, we do try to keep the neighborhood very peaceful and tidy, especially for our elderly residents. She said it with a smile, but something in her tone made me stiffen. Still, we brushed it off. The first few weeks were lovely. The neighborhood kids rode bikes up and down the street. Mail arrived on time. The air smelled like jasmine in the evenings. We even got a letter from the HOA welcoming us officially with a list of community resources, including contact numbers for pest control, landscaping, and even emergency contacts. It felt safe, predictable, what we had always hoped to give our daughter. We focused on settling in, making the home truly ours. I built the ramp myself over a weekend using the exact specifications provided by our medical caseworker. It was essential, not optional. My daughter's condition meant she couldn't safely walk longer than a few steps without assistance, and falls could be dangerous. The day after the ramp went up, Karen showed up again, arms crossed, sipping from a pastel thermos. I noticed the ramp. It's quite prominent. I explained it was medically necessary, and she nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Of course, of course. Just, if you could consider painting it a more neutral color, HOA aesthetics and all. I didn't respond. Something told me this wouldn't be the last comment. But I didn't want to start a war. We'd had enough battles in hospitals and insurance offices. The truth was, part of me wanted to believe she meant well. Maybe she was just overly concerned with appearances. Maybe it came from a good place. That illusion didn't last long. Slowly, other odd things started happening. Packages were moved from our doorstep. We received passive-aggressive notes about our trash cans being visible for too long. HOA notices arrived citing vague complaints, unapproved modifications, excessive noise, medical devices visible from the street. My daughter didn't understand. She thought we lived in a fairy tale town. She waved at neighbors from her window. She decorated the ramp with stickers and said it looked like a princess path. It broke my heart to see her trying to make a home in a place that was silently pushing her out. One morning, she asked me, "Daddy, why does the lady always look mad at me?" I didn't know how to answer. I told myself we'd fix it, that we'd attend HOA meetings, explain her condition, make them see the human side. But deep down, I had a growing fear that in a place obsessed with order and image, there might not be room for a child who didn't fit the mold. Still, we clung to peace. We believed in community. We thought we could make it work. Until the day that illusion shattered, until the betrayal went public and everything changed. It began with the clipboard. That's when everything subtly shifted from friendly neighborhood oversight to something that felt more like surveillance. Karen started walking past our home more frequently, always around the same time in the late afternoon, always with that beige clipboard in hand, and always stopping for just a second too long in front of our mailbox, our ramp, or our flower beds. At first, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe she's just doing her HOA duties, I told my wife, but even then, something didn't sit right. One afternoon, while playing in the driveway with my daughter, I saw Karen crouch slightly and take a photo of the oxygen tank cart parked by the garage door. Not overtly, not with permission, just a quick, sneaky click and a glance over her shoulder. I called out, "Can I help you with something?" She stood, startled, and said, "Oh, I'm just updating records for the HOA inventory, making sure all external modifications are logged. Nothing personal." But I could already feel it in my gut. This wasn't about inventory. It was about control. The next week, we received our first violation notice. According to the HOA letter, our front yard contained unsightly medical equipment visible from the public sidewalk. They were referring to the small utility box we discreetly placed outside to store backup oxygen tanks for our daughter's emergency needs. I was stunned. We had cleared it with our contractor. It was safe, compact, and essential. We replied with documentation from our doctor and hospital, even included a letter from our pediatric specialist. The response? Another warning, this time citing a clause about nonconforming additions. Karen rang our doorbell the next day holding a copy of a notice. I'm sure you understand, she said sweetly. We just want to maintain a certain aesthetic for the neighborhood. Some families feel, she paused, searching for the most offensive polite word. Disrupted by the medical displays. Disrupted. That was the word she chose for life-saving equipment. My wife stood beside me, stunned into silence, eyes welling up. But that was only the beginning. Karen began referring to our daughter indirectly at HOA meetings. A neighbor told us, she'd said, some residents need to understand that this isn't a special needs housing community. We pay a premium to avoid these issues. These issues. My daughter, the ramp, the oxygen tank, the wheelchair-accessible van in the driveway. Then came the letter addressed not even to us, but to all homeowners on the block. It was slipped into mailboxes and titled, Reminder on Community Standards. In it, Karen warned about recent visual and acoustic disturbances and stressed the need for HOA compliance to protect property value. She didn't name us, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. That week, we noticed the change. Fewer people waved. The kid across the street stopped coming over. My daughter, usually cheerful, asked if she had done something wrong. People don't smile at me here anymore, she said one morning as I helped her into the van for her physical therapy appointment. I wanted to shield her, to erase the tension from her world. But the truth was becoming clearer by the day. We weren't welcome, not because of anything we had done, but because of who we were and what our child needed to live. Karen's campaign wasn't just about rules, it was personal. She saw us as a blemish on her perfect picture of suburbia, and she was mobilizing every HOA tool, every loophole, and every passive-aggressive note to drive us out. We still believed at that point that logic and empathy would prevail, that someone on the board would step in and say, enough. But instead, the warnings kept coming, the whispers grew louder, and the neighborhood began to close in. And while we were desperately trying to hold on to normal, we didn't realize the worst was still ahead. That Karen wasn't finished, not by a long shot. It started as a trickle, one envelope taped to our door, then another slid into our mailbox with the HOA emblem stamped cold and official in the upper left corner. The first one, stiff with corporate formality, informed us that the wheelchair ramp we had built was in violation of unauthorized external modifications. I blinked, stunned. I had already submitted the necessary paperwork weeks ago, complete with hospital letters and ADA compliance documents. But the notice made no mention of that. It simply demanded that we either remove or repaint the structure within 7 days. My wife and I exchanged exhausted glances. It's a mistake, I said, trying to calm her, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. The second notice came 2 days later, this time complaining that our wheelchair-accessible van was visually disruptive to the neighborhood's landscape and suggested that we park it out of public view. Public view? It was our driveway. And what were we supposed to do? Teleport the van into a garage too small to accommodate it? Then came a notice about the medical box outside. Yes, the one Karen had snapped a photo of. They claimed it was a storage violation and warned that visible utility items could deter buyers and lower resale value. Lower resale value. That was the real concern, wasn't it? Not our daughter's survival. Not her mobility. Not her dignity. It was about Karen's vision of her perfect postcard street and how we, with our medically fragile child, didn't fit. I began noticing more things. Each time we stepped outside, Karen was there, not always obvious, but always present, watering her flowers for the third time that day. walking her dog past our house at the exact moment we be coming or going. And when she wasn't there in person, she was there in paper. Her name always CC'd at the bottom of each new violation notice, subtly reminding us she was the puppet master pulling the strings. I attended my first HOA meeting out of desperation. The room was filled with people I barely knew. Neighbors who once smiled politely, now watching me with carefully neutral expressions. I stood, calmly laid out our case, and shared documents proving our ramp and van were both necessary and compliant. I tried to appeal to their humanity. I even showed them a short video of my daughter giggling as she wheeled herself down the ramp with a stuffed animal in her lap. For a moment, I thought I saw a few eyes soften. But then Karen stood up. "We sympathize," she said, hands folded like a saint, "but community standards exist for everyone. If we make exceptions here, where does it end? What about homeowners who want to build sheds or install fountains or paint their doors neon pink? We must protect our property values." There were murmurs of agreement. Someone even clapped. I left that meeting shaking, not with fear, but with fury. These weren't HOA warnings. These were pressure tactics designed to wear us down, to make us feel like intruders in our own home. They weren't asking us to comply, they were warning us to leave. Over the next week, more notices came. One accused us of unsightly waste after a medical supply shipment was delayed on our porch for a few hours. Another stated our landscaping was below neighborhood standards because a few leaves had gathered near the base of the ramp. They were absurd, petty, but they were relentless. My wife began to cry at night, silent sobs into the pillow while our daughter slept beside us, unaware of the war being waged in her name. "We try to do everything right," she whispered one night. "Why are they doing this to her?" I didn't have an answer. All I had was a growing certainty that we weren't dealing with a misunderstanding or a difference in opinion. We were under siege from a system Karen had learned to weaponize with precision, and while we were trying to hold our family together, she was planning her next move, something far more invasive, far more personal. We had no idea she was about to cross the final line, from HOA warnings to public humiliation. It was a Saturday morning when everything changed again. The kind of morning where you're just trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy, pancakes on the griddle, cartoons in the background, and the faint hiss of oxygen through my daughter's machine. We had finally managed a night of uninterrupted sleep, a rare gift in our world, and I remember thinking maybe things are settling down. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from a neighbor I barely knew, someone 2 streets over. The message read, "Hey, I thought you should see this before it spreads more. I'm so sorry." Attached was a screenshot from the Sycamore Oaks neighborhood Facebook group. My stomach tightened before I even opened it, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw. There, front and center, was a picture of our daughter, in her wheelchair, head turned slightly as the morning sun caught her four-pole in just the right light. Karen had posted it with the caption, "When exceptions are allowed to run wild, this is what it becomes. Should we all start building hospitals in our front yards?" I dropped the phone. My wife, across the kitchen, saw my face pale. "What happened?" she asked. I couldn't speak. I just handed her the phone, and the moment she read it, the blood drained from her face. "She posted our daughter?" she gasped. "On Facebook." But it wasn't just the photo, it was what followed. Dozens of comments, some from names we recognized, others anonymous. This is why HOAs exist. Not fair to everyone else who plays by the rules. Isn't this a HIPAA issue? Why should we all suffer property devaluation? It was surreal. Devaluation? We weren't dumping trash. We weren't running illegal businesses. We were trying to raise a disabled child with dignity, and yet, somehow, to them, that was the offense. The post didn't stop at the photo. Karen had also uploaded a second image, a partial screenshot of my daughter's medical records, her diagnosis, her condition, her feeding schedule, the name of the rare disorder we had fought so hard to manage. It was all there, in a Facebook group, for strangers to gawk at, to judge, to debate as if it were a zoning issue and not a little girl's life. Where the hell did she get this? I whispered. My wife was already in tears. This is illegal, right? It has to be. That's private. That's protected. I called the hospital. The privacy officer confirmed that only authorized caregivers had access, and if Karen had it, it had to have come from someone inside. A leak. A betrayal we hadn't even imagined. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing. Friends, parents from my daughter's therapy group, co-workers, people saying, "Is this your child? What's going on?" The humiliation wasn't just online, it was crossing into real life. A local real estate agent commented, suggesting our visible presence might impact neighborhood resale potential. Someone else wrote, "I'm not against medical needs, but there are proper communities for this." Proper communities? As if we belonged in exile. The post had been up for hours before Facebook even reviewed it, and even then, they only blurred the medical image. The photo of our daughter in her chair? Still there. Still collecting reactions. Still a spectacle for suburban voyeurs. I felt the rage boiling in my chest like a volcano. I grabbed my car keys and was halfway out the door before my wife stopped me. "You can't go over there," she said. "That's what she wants. We do this the right way." But I couldn't sit still. I had to do something. I contacted the police, but the officer sounded indifferent. It's a civil matter unless we can prove harm or malicious intent. Malicious intent? She posted my daughter's medical file. If that didn't count, what did? That night, we sat in silence. My daughter, mercifully unaware, was coloring with her markers in the living room. She smiled up at us and asked, "Can I draw pictures for the neighbors? Maybe then they'll like me again." And that broke me. I walked into the bathroom and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not because I was sad, but because I was furious. And because I knew with absolute certainty that this was war. Karen had crossed the line. She had turned our child into public ammunition. She had tried to shame us into silence. But she had no idea. We were just getting started. After the Facebook post, nothing felt safe anymore. Not our home, not our neighbors, not even the sidewalk outside where my daughter used to giggle as she watered the rose bushes. The air around our house had changed, grown colder, tighter, like an invisible fog of judgment clung to the bricks. Every time I stepped outside, I felt the weight of eyes from behind blinds. No one said anything, not to our faces, but the silence was louder than words. My daughter, once so proud of her purple wheelchair and her sparkly ramp, now hesitated to go out. "Can I wait until it's dark?" she asked one day, her voice barely audible. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat, knowing that for a 6-year-old to feel ashamed of just being, something had broken far deeper than the HOA bylaws. The true damage had begun. My wife deleted all her social media after a woman she didn't even know messaged her, saying we were using our daughter's illness for sympathy points. My wife sobbed in the shower that night, biting down on a towel so our child wouldn't hear. We started sleeping with the curtains drawn tight, security cameras blinking red on every corner of our property, not to protect ourselves from burglars, but from neighbors. My daughter asked, "Did I do something wrong?" I told her no. I told her she was brave, strong, beautiful, but she didn't believe me. The betrayal had seeped into her too. She no longer waved at the mailman. She stopped drawing cards for the neighbors. She clung to us more at night, her nightmares louder and more frequent. "They don't want us here," she whispered once, and it hit me like a hammer. I hadn't said those words out loud, but she had felt them just the same. I tried to keep working, to keep earning, but every time I opened my laptop, I found myself sucked back into that damned Facebook thread. Karen hadn't taken it down. Despite dozens of reports, appeals, and messages, it still stood, gleaming like a victory post. And the worst part? It had likes. People had actually liked it. Some comments were worse than before. "This is why neighborhoods have standards. Pity can't be an excuse for lowering the bar." Even one that read, "I'd move if I lived next to that." That, my daughter. A thing. I began spiraling, obsessing. I started researching defamation laws, privacy breaches, HIPAA violations, even cyber harassment statutes. I wrote long emails to Facebook, to local news outlets, to disability rights organizations. Some replied with polite support. Most didn't reply at all. My wife tried to focus on our daughter's health, her therapies, her emotional recovery, but even our daughter's physical progress had stalled. Her therapists noticed it, less energy, less engagement. One of them pulled me aside and asked, "Has something changed at home?" I nearly laughed. Something had changed everywhere. Karen's post wasn't just a post. It was a nuclear bomb dropped into our daily life. A single act of cruelty wrapped in HOA formalities and suburban smiles that left fallout in every direction. We became isolated, marooned inside a home that once promised safety. We debated moving, but how? Who would buy our house after Karen's campaign? Who would believe our side of the story over the smiling board member with a color-coded clipboard? We were trapped until one morning, my daughter was playing with her stuffed animals in the living room. She had lined them all up like an audience and was pretending to give a speech. "Hi, my name is Lily," she said in a soft, practiced voice. "I like stars and pancakes, and I don't want people to hate me because of my tubes." She paused, then added, "I didn't choose to be sick." I watched from the hallway, hands trembling, eyes stinging. That was the moment everything inside me hardened. No more apologies, no more hiding. Karen had tried to make us ashamed of our child, but what she didn't realize was that shame only works if you let it in. And we weren't going to let it win. I kissed my daughter's head and whispered, "We're going to fix this. Baby, I promise." The storm inside me had turned into focus. The war Karen started would not end in whispers. It would end in courtrooms. The breaking point came quietly, no sirens, no dramatic showdowns, just one more moment of quiet humiliation that finally pushed us over the edge. A friend from my old job messaged me, "Hey, is this about your daughter? I just saw something on a local community page. Thought you should know." My hands trembled as I clicked the link. It wasn't just the neighborhood Facebook group anymore. The post had been shared publicly outside the gated little HOA bubble. Someone, maybe Karen, maybe one of her defenders, had reposted it on a community forum titled Neighborhood Watch, keeping our streets clean. There it was again, my daughter's face, blurred slightly but still recognizable. Karen's words beneath it, now rewritten for a larger audience. Some families abuse medical exceptions to skirt neighborhood rules. Our community deserves to stay clean, compliant, and family-friendly, not turn into a halfway house for pity points. My heart thundered. But then I saw the comments. Not HOA neighbors this time, strangers, people asking for our address, mocking us, debating whether our daughter should be in a home, or if we were playing the system. Some were even worse. One anonymous profile wrote, "If she needs all that equipment to live, maybe she shouldn't be here at all." That line broke something in me that hadn't broken yet. This was no longer about Karen's hatred. It was about the fire she had lit and the fact that now others were fanning the flames. This wasn't just a neighborhood issue, it had become a public shaming campaign. I looked at my wife. Her eyes were glassy, but no longer just from tears. There was steel there now. Rage, resolve, fire. "We post our story," she said flatly. "Today." And we did. I opened my laptop and wrote the hardest post of my life. We shared everything, screenshots of Karen's Facebook posts, her original captions, her invasive photos, even the blurred-out medical file she had somehow acquired. We attached a video of our daughter explaining what the ramp meant to her. "It helps me not fall," she said softly. "I want to go outside like other kids." The post went up on our personal pages, on disability rights groups, on our local news tip lines, and on Twitter under the hashtag HOA harassment. It exploded. Within 12 hours, our inboxes were flooded, hundreds of messages from families across the country who had faced the same battles. HOAs demanding ramp removals, HOA fines for accessible vans, HOA board members policing disability accommodations. We weren't alone. And Karen? Her post was now being circulated in disability advocacy groups as a warning of what hatred disguised as community standards could do. Activists began tagging the HOA. Lawyers reached out. A retired civil rights attorney messaged me, "I'll take your case pro bono. This woman just broke the law." A small local news outlet contacted us first, asking if we'd go on record. We agreed, and by morning, a headline spread across the region: HOA board member accused of exposing disabled child's medical info in public Facebook post. Karen's name was in the article. So was ours. We didn't care anymore. If she wanted to make our daughter public, she was going to learn what real exposure felt like. By evening, larger outlets picked up the story. Karen deactivated her Facebook account. Her friends, those who had liked her post, began quietly untagging themselves and removing comments. But the internet never forgets, and neither would we. For the first time in weeks, our phones buzzed not with hate, but with support. Messages from strangers, flowers delivered to our porch. A mother from another state sent her daughter's hand-painted picture that read, "Your ramp is beautiful." Our daughter smiled when she saw it. It was small, but it was something. It was healing. But we knew this wasn't over. Not yet. We had gone public, but now we had to go legal. Karen had violated federal privacy laws, and the HOA had failed in its duty to protect residents equally. They had let it happen. Some had even enabled it. It was time to hold them accountable, and we were ready to walk in the storm with our daughter by our side, head high, chair shining, ramp decorated with the same stickers Karen once found offensive. This was our home, and we were done being quiet. The day we walked into the attorney's office, it no longer felt like we were just victims in a cruel neighborhood drama. We were plaintiffs, and the gloves had come off. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed civil rights advocate named Ms. Reyes, had already reviewed the screenshots, the Facebook posts, and the emails. She looked up from the thick file she'd compiled and said, with firm clarity, "This is a clear violation of HIPAA and multiple privacy statutes. You're not just dealing with defamation, you're dealing with unlawful exposure of medical records. We have a case, and a strong one." My wife squeezed my hand, and I felt a tremor of something I hadn't felt in weeks: hope. Reyes explained that while HOAs aren't medical entities, anyone who gains access to protected health information through unofficial means and distributes it with intent to harm can be held liable. Karen didn't just post a photo. She posted sensitive health information tied to our child's identity. That, Reyes said, was not only unethical, it was likely criminal. We signed the paperwork that day, and just like that, our pain was now a case file, our daughter's trauma now Exhibit A. Karen, meanwhile, didn't retreat quietly. As news of the lawsuit spread, she doubled down. She reactivated a backup Facebook account and began pushing her narrative in whisper campaigns. It was public information, she claimed. They posted it online themselves before. I didn't do anything illegal. We hadn't. We had never posted her medical condition in detail, ever, but facts didn't matter to Karen. She started telling neighbors that we were grifting sympathy, that we were weaponizing their daughter's condition for attention and lawsuits. Flyers began appearing in mailboxes and signed, of course, warning residents about families trying to profit off lawsuits at the HOA's expense. We knew exactly who was behind them. Our neighborhood, once eerily silent, suddenly became tense and divided. Some neighbors, especially older residents, stood firmly behind Karen, saying this lawsuit would drag down property values and create media problems for the community. Others, especially younger families and people who had once avoided conflict, now began showing quiet support. We'd get a nod, a wave, or a soft knock on the door. "We're with you. We're just afraid to say it too loud." A single mother 2 blocks down left a note, "On our porch, my son uses a breathing machine at night. I'm scared they'll come after me next. Thank you for standing up." The division was palpable. At the next HOA meeting, the board refused to address the lawsuit directly. "We don't comment on pending litigation," the president said. But when asked if they would censure Karen, who was still sitting proudly at the front with her binder of rules, they deflected. "We encourage neighborly resolution of disputes," they replied. No apology, no statement, nothing. It was as if our daughter's pain was just an inconvenience to their well-groomed suburb. Reyes sent a formal cease and desist letter to Karen, demanding she take down any remaining posts and refrain from making further defamatory statements. Karen responded publicly through a local Facebook page, of course, stating that she was being targeted by a family who couldn't follow basic community rules. She ended her post with, "If protecting our neighborhood's standards makes me the villain, so be it." That line was like gasoline on the fire. By the end of the week, disability rights groups had begun tagging national organizations. A Change.org petition titled Protect Disabled Children from HOA Discrimination had thousands of signatures. Local news was now national. Karen's photo appeared next to headlines like, "Mother sues HOA member after daughter's medical records leaked online." Through all of it, my daughter simply asked, "Are we bad people?" And that broke me again. No, we weren't bad people. We were a family under siege for doing what any parent would do, protect their child. And now, finally, the fire Karen lit was burning her too. The legal path ahead would be long. There would be depositions, hearings, possibly a trial. But for the first time, the fight was on equal ground. We weren't hiding anymore. Karen had tried to destroy us with humiliation. Now she'd faced justice, public, undeniable, and permanent. The night of the HOA meeting, the air outside buzzed with a strange tension like the stillness before a lightning strike. We weren't just attending as homeowners anymore. We were walking into the room as plaintiffs in an active lawsuit, parents of a publicly humiliated child, and the quiet center of a storm the whole neighborhood could feel. As we entered the community hall, eyes turned, some wide with curiosity, others tight with judgment. Karen was already there, seated at the head table in her signature cream blazer, that smug, impenetrable mask fixed on her face. She glanced up when we walked in. No flinch, no shame, just a controlled smile that didn't reach her eyes. The board president called the meeting to order, clearly flustered by the larger-than-usual turnout. Some residents sat stiffly, gripping printouts of the Facebook post. Others whispered behind their hands, casting nervous glances between Karen and us. "We will begin tonight with general concerns," the president said, but before he could finish, a voice rose from the back. "Are you going to address the lawsuit?" It was an elderly man with a walker, a long-time resident known for his neutrality. Murmurs spread. The board tried to dodge. "We can't speak. On legal matters currently under review," the treasurer replied, clearing her throat. But another voice jumped in. A mother, holding her toddler, stood and said loudly, "So we're just going to pretend that one of our board members didn't post a disabled child's medical file on Facebook?" Karen shifted but said nothing. The room broke into chaotic chatter. Some voices calling for her removal, others demanding silence until the matter was settled legally. That's when I stood up. I wasn't planning to speak, but something in me snapped. My voice was low, but clear. Our daughter is 6 years old. She cannot defend herself. But we can, and we will. I turned to the room. Karen didn't just post a photo. She posted private medical information. She publicly attacked our family because we didn't fit her picture of a perfect neighborhood. I pulled out a folder and held it up. This is a printed record of every violation notice we received, documented with dates, timestamps, and responses. It is harassment. It is targeted. And it is cruel. The board sat frozen. Karen crossed her legs and finally leaned forward. With all due respect, she said in her sugar-slick voice, "No one here wants to make anyone feel uncomfortable. But when families bring in equipment and ramps and large medical vehicles, it sets a precedent. We have rules for a reason." Gasps erupted around the room. Someone shouted, "Are you serious?" Another, "She's a child." Karen went on, undeterred. "This isn't personal. It's about maintaining the standards that make our property valuable. If they needed those things, maybe they should have chosen a more appropriate community, like one with medical accommodations built in." That was it. The mask had slipped. She said it out loud. The discrimination, the ableism, the real reason behind months of violations and whispers and shame, it was all laid bare. Before the board could intervene, a police officer stepped into the back of the room. We had requested a civil standby in case of escalation, and seeing him there gave us the final push. Our lawyer, who had come with us quietly and sat in the back row, stood up and introduced herself. "I'm here on behalf of the family," she said, "and I'd like to formally inform the board that in addition to the civil lawsuit, we are also exploring criminal charges under HIP-related provisions, cyber harassment laws, and violations of the Americans with Disabilities Act." Karen went pale for the first time. The officer stepped forward, asking calmly to speak with her outside. Her face twisted, not with fear, but fury masked as confusion. "This is a witch hunt," she said, rising stiffly. "You people are trying to destroy everything we built here." "No," I said, locking eyes with her. "We're just taking back what you tried to steal." The room was dead silent as she was escorted out. The board adjourned the meeting minutes later, visibly shaken. No one spoke to us on the way out, but no one dared stop us either. For the first time, the balance had shifted. The silence of complicity had been broken. And now, the entire community had heard her, really heard her. The mask was gone. And behind it was a woman not fit to lead anyone, let alone represent families like ours. We didn't walk home that night, we marched. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had changed. And for the first time, we had the high ground. In the days that followed the explosive HOA meeting, our house felt like both a battlefield and a sanctuary. The war outside had gone public, Karen exposed, her defenders silenced or scattering, but inside, the dust hadn't settled. Trauma lingers long after the final blow is dealt, and it had seeped into every corner of our home like smoke. Our daughter no longer asked to play outside. The stickers she once proudly decorated her ramp with had peeled, weathered by both sun and shame, and she made no effort to replace them. Her wheelchair sat by the window, like a silent witness to everything she had endured. She barely spoke at meals, no longer humming the silly songs she used to sing between bites. One night, she crawled into our bed and whispered, "I'm sorry I made people angry." My wife and I just held her. No amount of legal victories or public support could undo what had been done to her spirit. We tried everything: colorful new books, surprise gifts, even planning a day trip to the zoo, but her spark remained dim. It wasn't until we took her to a small community event, far away from Sycamore Oaks, that something shifted. There was a booth for children with chronic illnesses run by families like ours. They had balloons, music, and tables filled with toys adapted for kids with mobility challenges. Our daughter rolled up slowly, unsure, but the moment she saw another little girl using a feeding tube like hers, her eyes lit up. They talked. They laughed. They even exchanged hair clips. It was the first time in weeks that she smiled without effort. That night, while putting her to bed, she said softly, "They weren't scared of me." It pierced through every wound Karen had tried to inflict. The healing had begun, not with court orders or news coverage, but with connection. Meanwhile, my wife and I were unraveling our own emotional knots. She'd begun therapy through a trauma specialist recommended by our attorney, and I followed shortly after. For the first time, we allowed ourselves to process not just what happened, but what we had survived. The shame we had been made to feel for simply caring for our child began to fade, replaced by something stronger: righteousness, clarity, purpose. Support poured in from unexpected places. Families from across the country messaged us, sharing their own HOA nightmares. Disabled children fined for ramps, parents bullied for therapy equipment, elders harassed for mobility vans. Our story had cracked something open, and people were speaking out. A disability advocacy group offered to sponsor an awareness campaign using our story as the centerpiece. We agreed. If we had suffered in silence, we could at least make sure others didn't have to. Our lawyer, Reyes, informed us that Karen's legal team was now scrambling. Settlement discussions had quietly begun. They were trying to avoid a full trial. We weren't sure yet whether to accept or take it all the way, but one thing was certain: Karen would not walk away clean. She had underestimated the very people she tried to erase. Still, in the quiet moments, early mornings, soft lullabies, school lunch prep, there were reminders of the scars. Our daughter would still sometimes flinch when we mentioned neighbors, and I'd catch my wife staring blankly out the window, lost in memory. But there was also strength growing in those cracks. We were not broken. We were bruised, but rebuilding. The ramp was repainted, not to appease Karen, but to honor our daughter. She chose the colors, sky blue and lavender. She added new stickers. One of them read, "My chair, my castle," and she placed it right in the center of the rail where Karen used to stand and glare. Healing doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly in pieces through small victories and quiet defiance. We had lost something in the storm, our sense of safety, our illusion of community, but we had gained something greater, the unshakable knowledge that we did not fold. We protected our child, we stood our ground, and we forced the world to look at what it tried to ignore. The wreckage would always be part of our story, but so would the fight that came after. And in that fight, we found who we truly were. The legal action we initiated wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was about sending a message to every HOA board that had ever treated families like ours as an inconvenience, a blemish on their perfectly trimmed lawns and sanitized suburban image. The moment our lawyer, Ms. Reyes, officially filed the lawsuit in district court, the tone of everything shifted. What had begun as digital harassment and neighborhood hostility was now a matter of federal and state law. The case focused on three key points: the unlawful distribution of protected medical information, public defamation of a minor, and systemic disability-based discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Karen was named as a defendant. So was the HOA itself, for its continued inaction, complicity, and failure to enforce ethical standards when they mattered most. Discovery began swiftly. Karen's online activity was subpoenaed, including deleted Facebook posts, private messages, and internal HOA communications. What we uncovered left even our seasoned attorney stunned. Not only had Karen shared our daughter's medical details without consent, but she had pressured another resident who worked at a local clinic to access and forward her records under the pretense of community safety. That individual, too, was now under investigation for violating HIPAA laws. Even more damning, HOA board emails revealed that multiple complaints from residents in support of us had been ignored or buried, a deliberate pattern of discrimination masked behind policy. They had labeled our ramp a community risk, our oxygen supply box a visual disruption, and our presence problematic. It was there in black and white. It wasn't about rules. It was about removing us. We attended a closed-door mediation session, accompanied by Reyes and another advocate from a national disability organization who joined our case pro bono. Karen's legal team was cold, mechanical, still trying to play the victim card. She was concerned for the character of the community, one of them said, to which Reyes replied flatly, she broadcasted a child's illness to a public forum. That's not concern. That's targeted cruelty. The HOA board's legal rep looked visibly nervous. They knew what was coming. We were prepared to go to trial. But as media pressure mounted and disability rights groups began calling for national attention, the HOA's insurers pushed for settlement. The numbers weren't what mattered to us, though the offer was substantial. What mattered were the terms. Karen's permanent removal from any HOA-affiliated leadership role, not just in Sycamore Oaks, but in any associated communities, a public written apology to our family and daughter to be published in the HOA newsletter and local paper. The HOA to adopt and implement mandatory disability sensitivity training for all board members. Amendment of HOA bylaws to include explicit protections for ADA-compliant structures and medical accommodations. Funding of a small annual scholarship for children with disabilities in the community named in honor of our daughter. They resisted at first, but when our attorney showed them the press release ready to be distributed to national networks, complete with timelines, quotes, and evidence, their resolve crumbled. They agreed. All of it. Karen, however, refused to apologize. She walked out of the mediation room red-faced and shaking. Her attorney followed, whispering something to her about reputation damage control. We didn't follow. We didn't need to. She had already lost, not just in court, but in the eyes of every resident who once saw her as a protector of community values. Now, she was the symbol of everything wrong with suburban gatekeeping. When the news broke publicly, the community was divided. But louder than ever before were the voices of support. One of our neighbors, an older veteran who had once sided with Karen, rang our doorbell. He handed us a card. Inside, it read, "I was wrong. Your daughter belongs here more than any of us." My wife cried when she read it, not out of sadness, but because justice had finally spoken. We had taken legal action, not to win money or fame, but to reclaim our space, our dignity, and our daughter's right to exist without shame. And in doing so, we changed the rules, not just for us, but for every family who would ever come after. The courtroom was colder than I expected, bright, clinical, and humming with tension as Karen took the stand. It had been months since our daughter's medical privacy was dragged into public shame, but now, surrounded by lawyers, journalists, and members of the community who once watched silently, Karen finally faced the consequence of every smug step she took in the name of property values. She arrived in a beige suit, her signature pearl earrings in place, carrying herself like a misunderstood heroine. But under oath, the mask couldn't hold. Our attorney, Ms. Reyes, was calm but razor sharp. She began by establishing motive. Karen's documented opposition to our ramp, her repeated HOA violation reports, and her involvement in similar complaints against another family with an autistic child several years prior. Then came the bombshell: printed Facebook messages between Karen and the clinic receptionist who had leaked our daughter's information. "Just send me the diagnosis, I won't share your name." "The community deserves to know," Karen had written. Karen tried to play innocent. "I didn't know it was illegal. I only meant to protect the neighborhood." But Reyes wasn't done. She presented the board emails, showing Karen's refusal to stop posting even after formal warnings. She brought up HOA board minutes where Karen actively campaigned to change ramp height regulations after ours was installed. It wasn't about safety. It was obsession. It was control. And then came the final video, a montage played for the court of our daughter's interviews and recorded moments from our home. "I didn't choose to be sick," she says in one clip, "but I still want to play outside." The courtroom was silent. Some jurors visibly moved. Karen stared straight ahead, jaw tight. Then she cracked during cross-examination. When asked if she would have done the same if the child hadn't been disabled, Karen said, "If they had just followed the aesthetic rules, this wouldn't have happened." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. That was the moment everything collapsed for her. The judge's verdict came 3 weeks later. Karen was found guilty of defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and unlawful dissemination of private medical data. The HOA was fined for its negligence and ordered to comply with all settlement terms and undergo federal oversight for the next 18 months. Karen's personal assets were partially liquidated to fulfill the judgment, and her name became a permanent fixture in the local bar association's ethics violation archives. But more than that, her reputation was shattered. The woman who once held court over trimmed hedges and matching porch lights was now a warning, a cautionary tale in board meetings across the state. And us, we were finally free. The apology letter Karen was court-ordered to write came typed, cold, and shallow, but we didn't care, because her signature on that paper was proof that we were never the problem. Our daughter's medical condition wasn't a threat to property values. It was a test of humanity that Karen failed miserably. The media frenzy eventually died down, but the story lived on. National organizations used it in training materials. Disability activists shared it as an example of standing firm in the face of institutional cruelty. Our daughter, for the first time, began reclaiming her joy. She proudly wheeled herself up the ramp, now painted with a mural of stars and clouds. Her name glittered across the bottom. When a new family with a disabled child moved into the neighborhood months later, they said they chose the street because we heard this place changed its heart. That's when we knew we had done more than win a court case. We had built a bridge for others to cross safely. As for Karen, she moved away in silence, her house sold below market value. Poetic, considering how obsessed she once was with resale numbers. She never spoke to us again. She didn't have to. Her silence was an admission of guilt the law had already confirmed. And our daughter? She smiled more, laughed louder, lived freely, because no HOA, no Facebook post, no cruel board member could ever again convince her, or us, that she didn't belong. What happened to our daughter was more than just an HOA violation. It was a violation of basic human decency. If the story moved you, made you angry, or opened your eyes, backhand index pointing, right? Don't just scroll past. Red circle subscribe to this channel. HOA denied access, where real families fight back against power-hungry HOAs and corrupt neighborhood bullies. Speech balloon comment below with Justice for Lily to show the world that no child should ever be treated like a threat just because they need help to live. Loudspeakers share this story with someone who needs to hear it, because when we stay silent, people like Karen win. And on this channel, we never let that happen.